Hello and welcome to the Catch a Lift Coaches Corner. I'm Cal Coach and Program Director Melissa, and this week I'm honored to welcome Tim Healy to the show. Tim is currently the Vice President of Operations at ID Technologies, a former Assistant Director of the FBI, and Captain in the United States Marine Corps. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coaches Corner. Tim, welcome.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, it's an honor to talk with you today. We have so much we want to cover. Let's jump right into it, Tim. Would you start today by telling us a bit about your life growing up and what would ultimately lead you to the U.S. Marines?
When I was growing up, I was very young and kind of decided this is what I wanted to do for a living. And I remember it was back in 1972. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I wanted to be an FBI agent. And so as we talked before, I went across the street. There was an FBI agent across the street. He was a special agent, Ken Kaiser. I said, Mr. Kaiser, you know, I'm young. This is 1972. I'm probably 14 or 15. And I said, I want to be an FBI agent. He goes, okay. And I said, can you tell me about it? He said, no. And I said, no. And he goes, look, it's almost summer. What I'd like you to do is I want you to come with me to work and see what it's like. And so a month or so later, I got on the train with him, went into the Chicago FBI office, met all the agents, was able to talk to the agents and chat with them, and really got an impression of what they did and how they did it. I was amazed and enthralled and said, this is what I want to do for my life, and continued to talk to him over a period of years because it was about a 14 or 15 year goal. And while I was in college, he was a teacher. I was going to be a teacher. And the Marines came by and I said, what about a Marine Corps officer? He goes, that would be great. So I said, I'm in. So I signed up for the PLC program back in 1976, 1977. And initially I was just going to be a ground officer for 3 years and then get in the FBI. And when I went to OCS the first time, it was Camp Upshur. And I looked at the guys that had flight guarantees and I said, they're no better than I am. And I didn't fly and they didn't fly. So I read a book, took the test, and then got a guaranteed flight contract because I'm thinking, okay, do I want to walk for 3 years or fly for 7? And I said, well, that's kind of easy.
Yeah.
So I signed up to fly, and that's what I did. So I was in college, went through OCS the summers of 77, 78, and then got in the Marine Corps and just absolutely loved it. I was in the Marine Corps for 7 years, went to flight school, and back then, I had a friend that went after me, and I said, look, you got to plan on a 12 to 15-hour day. And he goes, no, I'm only going to study for 4 hours. I said, Terry, you'll never get through it. And he didn't. He got washed out. It's a long process, but for us, it was you get in there and you work until you drop every single day, and then you may have some time on Sunday.
Oh my gosh.
And so I did well, and moved on to jets. Didn't want to go jets, wanted to be a helicopter pilot. But I was number 2 in my class. And number 1 had his first choice. Number 2 didn't get a choice, but he says, look, you're going to go jets because we need jet pilots. And there's a score that you have to pass, and you were number 2. So you passed the score. So where would you like to go? And so went to Beeville, Texas, and then went through jet school, and you had to fly T2s and A4s and did well. And then I wanted to go Harriers because it hovered. And so when you back then, you're talking about 1981, 1982 timeframe, you had to fly with the Harrier pilot, and I did. And so that one was a special selection. Harriers was a unique community because if you went to Harriers and you washed out, and some people did, you got the next jet you wanted. So there was a guy there that washed out, he went to F4s, another guy went to A4s. But if you washed out another jet, then you lost your wings, and so it was hard to fly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So flew Harriers for 7 years.
Let me ask you there, Tim, because we're going to talk about that a little more in a minute here. What made the Harrier so hard to fly? Because when we talked before, something you told me, you said the Harrier would eat people up. Talk to us about what that meant.
Well, there's 2 stories behind that. It would eat pilots. It was extremely difficult to fly. A lot of pilot error issues and a lot of just difficult to fly. I mean, I lost a lot of friends flying Harriers, and during the time frame that I flew from 82, from 79 to 86, there wasn't Afghanistan. There was nothing like that. But flying Harriers, I've lost a number of friends. The Harrier is a unique stall jet. It's short takeoff and landing, and it has the ability to do vertical landings and takeoffs like a helicopter.
Okay. Wow.
So it has like 4 or 5 different types of takeoffs and 4 or 5 different types of landings. So you could land conventionally with no nozzles, and that would be landing fast. You can have a slow landing with a nozzle cracked a little bit. You could have and then you can have a rolling vertical landing, and then you can have a vertical landing. So, when the Harrier transitioned between airborne flight, which was wing-borne flight, and engine-borne flight, which is off the engine, it was a real challenging issue in terms of, stability and things like that. Okay. To the point, years later, my son went through flight school, and he ran into a couple of Harrier pilots. And at that point, they had the B. There was the A and the B. Okay. The B was much easier to fly. But he had 3 Harrier pilots talk to him about, me. And he said, my dad flew Harriers. And he said, Dad, I got a really strange question out of all 3 of them. And they all asked the same question. And then when I answered it, they followed up with another question. And so they said, did he fly the A or the B? And he said, I flew the A. And then all 3 of them asked the same questions. I said, what was that, son? He goes, is he still alive?
Oh my gosh. That's incredible.
He goes, what was that all about, Dad? And I said, we used to eat pilots, and it was a challenge, but
wow.
It was a lot of fun. So I flew the Harrier, and then applied to the FBI and got in the FBI. So that was my course into the FBI.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Tim, for your service to our great nation. Let's talk about the FBI. So this has been your dream, since you were in school. What did it mean for you to finally get there?
It was, from 72 to 86, it was a 14-year goal.
Wow.
Right? And, I joined the Marine Corps. I went through OCS in 77, and actually PLC program in 77 and PLC program in 78. So it was 6 weeks that. And then I got commissioned in 79. So 77, 78, and 79. And then went to flight school, and then got my wings in 82. So it was, it was a culmination of everything that I wanted to do. And the reason I picked the FBI that I looked at was, 1, it's the premier federal law enforcement agency. Yeah. 2, they expected you to stay in shape, similar to the FBI, right, or similar to the Marine Corps.
Yep.
And then you had to use your brain. And so it was both, brains and interviews and working cases, but then you had to stay in shape. And then there was a law enforcement, process with it. So it literally, when I measured the FBI and I go 1 through 10, 10's the best day you could have, I'd have a 15, and I never had a 10 as a bad day. So every day you do something different. Every day you may go out and do an arrest, but you're helping people every single day. And what you did was, had effects on a person in a positive and sometimes negative way if you arrested somebody, but a positive way for the, for taking care of victims.
Right.
Contrast when I was in the Marine Corps, which I loved, but there was no war at the time. Now Marines and military folks that served from 20 years ago, from just pre-Iraq, Afghanistan, those guys are combat veterans, and they know what war is. They
right.
spend months and months. My son spent 7 to 9 month deployments. In the Marine Corps, that's a lot. The Army, it may not be a lot. But from 82 to 86, when I was flying, it was just flying, and I lost friends. It was never real. I mean, you just trained and trained, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In the FBI, first week I go on an arrest, and arrest somebody. And so right. it was you're training and training and training, and now it's real. And it was the ability to be able to do something you actually believed in and loved, and be able to help people. And candidly, I say it, and some people kind of scoff when I say it, but you're doing God's work. I mean, you're doing God's work, and you never have to do anything you don't feel comfortable with. If the case is is a bad case, you take it to the U.S. attorney and talk to them about it, and they decline prosecution and say, this is not worth us doing. So it was 27 years of the best time you could ever have. And all I wanted to be was a case agent, and then I fell into doing undercover, and that was fun, and did undercover and did a whole bunch of different things. So it was a great life.
Let's talk a bit about those tremendous years you had working at the FBI, Tim. You know, let's start in the early years where you're working on Operation Disconnect. Tell us about that time.
Operation Disconnect. I was in a 3-man RA and loved life. Anything that came in, I worked it. And so what was really neat about it is that we had one guy that did counterintelligence, one guy did government crimes, and then the other crimes that occurred in the resident agency, which was Ogden out of Utah, I covered. So if a bank robbery came in, I did it. If it was a fraud case, I did it. If it was a kidnapping case, I did it. If it was anything, I did it. I worked it. So I had hundreds of cases, and it was a blast. So I get this telemarketing case, and they're tough because with telemarketing cases, they're fraud cases, which eventually I specialized in. A guy decides to rob a bank. He walks in with a slip and says, I'm robbing the bank. He slips it over there. And I had one of these actually occur. The teller reads it, and she says, he wants to rob a bank. She goes, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. He pushes the check back or the demand note back.
Yeah.
And she says, I'm not doing that. She just walks away. And there's pictures of the guy trying to rob the bank, and he passes her the note. He passes it back and says no. And he picks up the note and reads it. I'm guessing for grammatical correctness and things like that. And it says, I'm robbing the bank. And she walks away, and he kind of and he walks out. Well, he didn't get any money, but he walked in to rob a bank. I don't have to prove that he intended to do that. So we prosecuted him for bank robbery. And you don't have to be successful to do that. So that one's easy. That type of crime, drug crimes, are really easy because you don't have to prove the intent of somebody. With fraud cases, you have to prove that they intended to defraud. So, and they're very difficult, especially on white collar crime cases, to be able to do that. And so you got to prove what's in the guy's head or the preponderance of the evidence to be able to do it. So they're challenging. So when I had my first telemarketing case, a lot of people didn't like them because they had to prove a lot of different things. And when you took them to the AUSA, they said, well, they were talking about buying a car and they could have bought one and blah, blah, blah. And so they were really tough to do. And the FBI was getting frustrated with those. And so I'm working this case, and I'm literally, I don't want to do undercover, but I want to work the case efficiently. And I'm thinking about how we could better do this to work a case, right, for Operation Disconnect. And it wasn't, I didn't think about Operation Disconnect. It didn't have that name at the time. It was just, there's got to be a better way.
Right.
And, for fraudulent telemarketers back then, what they would do is the telemarketers would go to a place and they'd set up an office, a phone room. And so they'd go in there and they'd get, stacks of phones. And then they'd set up, and it was all hardline. It wasn't cell phones at the time. And so they would set up phones. So to set up a fraudulent telemarketer ring or legitimate one, you'd have to have phones, number one. Number two, you'd have to have a list of leads so you could start calling people. So you'd have phones and then leads that you could start calling people.
Yep.
And then you'd have a product that you're trying to sell or whatever it was. And then you'd have to collect the money. So you collect the money with, a merchant account to do it with credit cards or money orders or however you do it. So there's basically those components that you'd have. So when I did the first case, I looked at those components, arrested the people, and then talk to the subjects about what were you guys thinking and what was this and how was it, to kind of get into their mind a little bit about how you can do that, right? So at that time, and this is back in like 1989 timeframe to 1993, and there was a lot of telemarketing fraud going out there. And there's a lot of what we used to call 1-to-5s. Like, hey, they'd call you and say, hey, congratulations, you won these gifts that range from a car down to $1,500 cash. And the worst you can do is $1,500. And, we want you to buy something that's like $400. Well, you wouldn't get a $1,500 gift. You wouldn't get a car. You would get a crappy little thing that was worthless, and they would take your money and they would come back at you over and over and over. And in some of the cases, it was horrendous. I mean, they were basically targeting senior citizens. I mean, senior citizens, people in their 70s, 80s that were confused, and then basically for everything. And I could share some really sad stories about some victims that, that just it's just incredible. So you start feeling those stories and you're thinking, God, there's got to be a better way. And I will never, we talked about it, Melissa, I'll never forget it. I'm driving home, and it's a 30-minute drive, and I'm thinking to myself, what could we do? And I'm thinking about all these products. I could do an undercover approach and all these potential products that we could offer these guys, to say, hey, you can do a better job. And, and then I'm thinking, you know what? The truth is, if there was a product that existed, these guys would already exploit it and do it and use it. And so, and then it got me a whole different thought process that I never even considered. And literally, I'm taking a step back going, you are such an idiot. And I'm driving, talking to myself, right? It's a 30-minute drive, and I'm driving home going, oh, man, you're an idiot. And once I realized I was an idiot, then everything broke, and I said, okay, now I can fix it. Look, dude, you don't have to come up with something real. It could be pretend, because it's not real with the fraudulent telemarketers anyway.
Yeah.
So that went through, I literally in like 20 minutes had this scenario of, okay, if they, a fraudulent telemarketer has to have a phone, right? They have to have leads, right? They have to be able to collect the money. So if you can exploit one of those three components, a phone, leads, or, how to collect the money, you have an opportunity to walk in and have a conversation with them about what you're doing, what's going on. So it was kind of a lead list. It was a lead generation system.
Okay.
And what I did was I said, okay. And at that point, I had worked 2 telemarketing cases, and I had basically, arrested both of the sets of subjects. And the second group that I had done, I had posed to the 2 owners, look, I'd like you to help me out, with an approach. And, I'm thinking about how I could approach fraudulent telemarketers. So they were my sounding boards. And, so they talked about their challenges. And so as I'm doing this, I'm going, okay, I would set up a machine, and it would be an automatic dialing machine that would randomly call people and say, congratulations, you won 1 of 5 gifts, but call this number. And they would call this number, and they would call into the number, and they would call the telemarketer, and then the telemarketer would pitch them. Now, this would be people that are called by a machine, and they would be told that they won this prize. And this is like 1989, and they would call in. So the fraudulent telemarketer wouldn't have a phone bill, and people would be calling in. They would be easier to sell.
Right.
So I would offer that to the fraudulent telemarketer. Now, this didn't exist. It was a computer that would be an automatic dialer that didn't exist. I made it up. But it was a tool that I used to sell the fraudulent telemarketer, say, I've got these machines strategically located throughout the country, and they would call people, like 1,000 an hour. Why 1,000 an hour? It was easy for me to remember. Okay. So I have a 12-line machine that would call 1,000 an hour. So it would literally call 12,000 an hour, because it's 12 different lines, saying, congratulations, you won this award, and go back. Now, the only catch to the fraudulent telemarketer would be, I need to be able to put the words on it. Okay. And so for me to put the words on it, I need to talk to your good salespeople. So I would walk in to the fraudulent telemarketer and say, you spend all this money on leads, this is what you do, but I've got this automatic dialer that will eliminate your lead costs, increase your opportunity to sell these guys. Your profits will be out of, astronomical. And all you got to do is give me a percentage of the business. And the only catch is you've got to allow me to talk to your people individually, one-on-one, about how they do it. And so I came up with the approach. And back then there was no PowerPoint. And I'm drawing out these presentations, and I'm sending to the FBI, and they're having these graphics designer design this pitch. Oh and gosh. Literally, I'm calling the fraudulent telemarketer saying, hey, my name is Mike Manson. That was my undercover name. And, I've got an automatic dialer that will eliminate your lead costs, make your phones ring off the hook, and your percentage of sales is going to be great. It's not going to cost you anything, and you'll make money on it. Will you talk to me for 5 minutes? Yes. So I would go in with this pitch, and everyone I went into, and I went into 65 phone rooms.
65?
Over a period of 3 years. Oh, every one of them said, I'm in. And the only catch was, I'm going to bring my interview team in to sit down with the people to talk to them. And you think about fraudulent telemarketers, you're letting people come in that they've never met to talk to their people.
Right.
But the catch was, look, because the owners would say, look, I'll tell you what to say. And I would say, no, it's not what they say. It's how they say it. You know, like the gifts range from a car down to $1,500. And the worst you're going to do is $1,500. So it was all about that. So literally I would pitch them. And then a week or two later, I'd have like 5 or 6 agents come in. And they'd go off into little corners with the individual fraudulent telemarketers. And they'd ask them questions like, what do you say? And we say the worst they could do is $1,500. What's the truth? They say the truth is these people are going to get effed. Or they're going to lose all their money. And that proved the criminal intent. So
incredible.
So I thought it was the coolest thing. And I'm pitching it. And I'm making phone calls to fraudulent telemarketers, testing my pitch out. Yeah. And I go to my supervisor and say, hey, look, I need some undercover guys to do this. And he's looking at me going, why don't you do that? And I said, I want to be the case agent, not the undercover agent. He goes, yeah, but you can do this. And I said, yeah, anybody can do it. Well, anybody couldn't do it. And he says, look, I'll give you support. You can do both. And so I did. So we started doing it in Salt Lake City. And this was 1989, extremely successful. FBI headquarters came out and said, can you franchise this? And I said, sure. So I basically came up and then trained other undercover agents. We set up a team of about 4 or 5 of us. And we went out and we destroyed it. I mean, it was, you'd walk in and we were literally in 15 different cities from LA, San Diego, Las Vegas, New York, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Salt Lake. And there's a whole bunch of them. And we would go in and it would be 3 approaches. I would call and introduce myself as Mike Manson, you know, this guy that owns this company, and here's the service that we can provide. I'd come out and actually do a pitch with one of my other undercover agents, and then we'd bring in a team of 5 or 6 undercover agents to sit down and interview and basically chat with the top salespeople. The top salespeople are the ones that rip the people off the most. Yeah. And then basically just chat with them. And they would, you know, you'd have conversations that would go, so the worst you could do is $1,500. Is that true? No, the worst they're going to do is they're going to lose all their money. And those kinds of conversations proved intent. So we had, you know, maybe 4 or 5 trials, and then the rest of that, you know, hundreds of people just. And when it came out in '93, you know, we had our takedown. We literally had 800 agents go out and arrest, you know, 400 people, 300 people, whatever it was.
Grief, that is incredible.
It really was. It was fun and it was cool. And you know, I was a fraudulent telemarketer for 3 years, and you know, and went all over the country, you know, to put all these people in jail. And just on a side note, you know, when we're doing these cases, they're real cases. And as an example, let me just share with you, and then I'll stop because I don't want to keep droning on about it. But I was talking to one of the victim's sons, and you know, he was so angry about these guys that had ripped off his mother, and he was angry from the standpoint that, I mean, like angry, like wanted to kill them. And I'm talking to him, and I said, Joe, you know, I get this, and I understand that they defrauded your mom, and you know, but you're this. I mean, you're talking about hurting them. And he says, Tim, you don't understand. You don't understand. And I said, help me. And he said, you know, my mom passed away, and this always kind of cracks me up a little bit when I think about it, because you just feel the emotion from him. And he said, you know, I went to clean out her house, and I'm cleaning out her refrigerator, and all she's got is dog food in the refrigerator. And he goes, you know, Mom didn't own a dog. And so he said, I'm her only son, and this means something to me because I grew up with 6 sisters. I was the only boy. And he goes, my mother didn't have enough, you know, she was so embarrassed. She couldn't tell me that she had lost all her money. So she lived the last 6 months of her life like this. And
oh my gosh.
Something from the, you know, from this, not fear, but ashamed, you know, that she had lost all her money, blamed it on herself. And she lived like this for the past 6 months, you know, and couldn't tell me that. And I've got to live with that the rest of my life. That's why I hate these people. And those people in all the interviews joked about how they took money from all these elderly people. And so the satisfaction you had when you arrested these guys, you put them
right.
It was, you know, like I said, you're doing God's work. I vividly remember one of the guys from Salt Lake City, And now it's been years, so he's probably out of jail. I hope he could listen to this. But he was making probably, and this is in the 90s, early 90s, he's making like, you know, a $10,000, $15,000 paycheck every 2 weeks. And he graduated high school, didn't graduate college. And he was such an arrogant jerk that, you know, he went back to high school and to show his teachers his paycheck and basically tell them that they were a bunch of losers. It was so satisfying to arrest him.
I bet it was.
You know, because of just, you know, you got, you know, the people in high school looking at this guy like, oh, this may be the way to go. And then at the end of the day, he's destroying people's lives. And at the end of the day, he spends time in jail because of what he did. And, you know, it was such satisfaction, you know, that it's, you know, you can't measure. You can't measure, you know, the reinforcement you have about doing that. So that's the job. That was the job of an FBI agent. So that was Operation Disconnect. It rocked. And, you know, for 3 years I was doing undercover and didn't want to do it. You know, but my supervisor said, look, you're the guy.
Yeah.
I'm not the guy. I'm the case agent. He goes, I can get case agents anywhere. They just got to manage the case. I can't get somebody that can talk like that. And I said, all right, whatever. So it was, and the team that I worked with, the undercover agents, they were the best of the best. I mean, they were phenomenal guys. So, you know, I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And it was an opportunity where you could look at a crime problem and say, how can we best address it? Yeah. And with the FBI, there's undercover opportunities, and there's a whole bunch of different opportunities like that you could do that. So I did that. That was going to be the only undercover that I did. I'm done with it. And I'm off doing SWAT stuff and doing investigations. I'm going back to my 3 MNRA.
That's not gonna last long though for you, Tim. It did. It didn't last long. And you know, before we get into it, because we want to talk about with you, you know, the Montana Freeman and the undercover work you did there. But just to kind of preface that, for anybody listening that's not familiar with it, Tim, would you give us some background information on the Montana Freeman?
Especially now, because you're talking about 2021, you know, and you know, when I was talking about the case for Disconnect, it was from 89 to 93, and people don't understand about, you know, the internet wasn't there and things like that, and, you know, and how people could be defrauded and things like that, and it was on a huge scale. While I was doing the undercover for Disconnect, I'm on the SWAT team, and one of my SWAT team leaders, and he was a god. He was fantastic, you know, Tommy Kennedy. And he retired after his case, but Tommy was an older SWAT guy. He worked out of Chicago, but he's kind of a Southern boy and just a great guy. And he worked out of the Billings RA out of Salt Lake City. And we were SWAT team brothers. And while we're doing that, you know, from 89 to 93, I'm undercover. And so I'm pulled in to do SWAT stuff, but I'm also doing this, you know, Operation Disconnect. And after that case was over with, you know, we're doing all the trials and things like that. And I looked the way I did. So I looked like an FBI agent. I wore a suit. I walk into a fraudulent telemarketer, and I'm telling them, look, I'm running this company. I'm running these guys, and got literally, you know, 300-400 fraudulent telemarketers to confess to say they're defrauding people.
Yep. So
Tommy is working this case. It's the Montana Freeman. And just to explain what they were, you know, and this is how he described it to me. I've got these white supremacists that have this ideology that's a combination of Bible studies and law, where they're defrauding the U.S. government and defrauding a bunch of different companies by writing these comptroller checks. And they're in this location of, you know, this 5-acre like ranch in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And they're threatening a lot of people, and they're very, very dangerous. And, you know, so dangerous that, and the sect's growing. And what's happening is people are coming in and getting trained about their philosophies and how to do this fraudulent activity, this comptroller warrant stuff. And it's getting extremely dangerous. I've got, at this point, when he had talked to me about it, you know, I didn't know who they were, but you know, the Montana Freeman were considered the Montana Freemen with the FBI, but then they became the Freemen because it spanned, multiple states. I mean, we were getting complaints from the FBI about their activity from dozens of states.
Really?
Yeah. God. And so it was this white supremacy group that had this ideology that crossed, different types of law books and things like that. They would use these obscure definitions, to kind of make this scheme, and they wouldn't admit that it was defrauding. When you talk to them, this is all legal. This is what you can do, and they would give classes about how to do it. And they would recruit other Montana freemen at different levels. Like, this is a way you can get money if you've got bad checks. This is a way you can participate with us because we're going to go out and kidnap a bunch of these officials. We're going to hold trials for them, and then we're going to have executions. And that's kidnapping and things like that. So these guys were actively planning that. And
wow,
it was getting to the point where it was getting kind of crazy. So
yeah,
Tommy had worked the case, had gotten some indictments, but the problem is that they were so dangerous. And then people don't remember this. This was post Ruby Ridge and Waco. And, if you remember in Waco, you remember in Ruby Ridge. In Waco, it ended in tragedy, but it didn't start with the FBI. It started as an ATF case. ATF went in there with guns, and they started a raid, and then a bunch of people got killed, and then some ATF agents were killed, and then there was a standoff for, a couple weeks, and then the Bureau had taken over the case, and then Koresh, when they were trying to take him down and started putting smoke grenades into the facility, Koresh lit everybody on fire, and they all died. And it was just horrendous. And then that was quickly followed by Ruby Ridge. And interesting enough, Ruby Ridge, occurred in my division. I was there at the time. And that ended, with, the tragedy of having some people killed. But that again wasn't an FBI case. That started again as an ATF case, and then it evolved to a Marshal's case because they had arrested the guy and he didn't show up. So the Marshals had a case. Marshall was killed, and then there was a standoff in there. So there was a lot of sensitivity to standoff and things like that about it. So at that point, the SIRG unit, which was a unit that was formed to address these types of issues and challenges, and it was a unique division within the FBI. Was looking at, you can't go into this compound. And at that point, it was 5 acres, and we can't go in because we're going to have a standoff, and there's got to be a better way. And so at that point, Kennedy had come to me to say, look, dude, and this is almost how he talked, you look like you do, and you had all these people talking to you.
You look like you do.
You talked about fraudulent telemarketing.
Right.
I don't know how the heck you did that, but I got these guys. And at the time, it was 5 acres and like 5 guys, and we had access inside. We could hear what was going on inside, from sensitive techniques. We had informants going in, and the idea is that we can't go in there and arrest them. The concern is that we're going to have another Waco or Ruby Ridge, and is there a way you can figure out an arrest plan? Since I'm on SWAT, since I'd done undercover, he said, what do you think? And so I said, I took a look at it. So that's kind of the background, and that's kind of how I got involved in it in the first place.
Okay. So what would come next in that journey with the Freemen?
So what, so he asked me, he goes, look, you look the way you look, and, we've got some criteria from FBI headquarters, what we can do and what we can't do. And, so what would you do to kind of lure them out? Could you figure out a way? And I said, sure. Let me take a look at it. And see what I can do. So they did a bunch of videos about how to do their fraudulent activity. And we had access to that. So I started looking at those and looking at ways to figure out how to best, work this case, this challenge, right? And it was very similar to working fraudulent telemarketing. It's like, okay, you got this problem, you got these elements. And out of these particular elements, there's weaknesses there that you could maybe exploit. And how would you do that? And how would that process work? And so all I need you to do is come up with a way that we can arrest these guys. I can't go in. I can't have contact with them face to face, but I got to be able to lure them out. What do you think? Now, they're working this fraudulent scheme or artifice to get money. So obviously they're motivated by money. But they have this religious kind of side view of it. So
right.
So, and then they're laundering these checks, and they're negotiating these comptroller warrants. And so I'm looking at all of that and saying, look, I hate to, and there was limitations, like no FBI agent, no FBI employee can go into the compound. We can send sources in there, but no FBI employee, because the thought is if they go in, they're going to be taken hostage and they're going to be beaten and tortured and killed. So I looked at it and said, okay, it's doable. And I looked at what they were doing on the fraudulent side, and they were having challenges being able to they couldn't negotiate every single check that they did. They had 100 checks, and maybe a couple of them would get negotiated. Okay. And what they would do is their scheme that they did a lot of IRS stuff. If you had an IRS bill of like $10,000, they would do a comptroller warrant or check for $20,000. They'd submit it to IRS. IRS would look at this check and said, oh, they paid us $20,000 and they only owe 10, and they would issue a refund of 10,000. And they would get
okay. Yep.
But that would happen, very, very seldom, and
right.
So it wasn't consistent. So what I had pitched to Tommy was, look, if I can be introduced as an undercover guy that is disgruntled, former military, like maybe a Harrier pilot, because I knew that.
Right.
And I'm just talking to him on the phone. And I'm talking at that point, it was Leroy Swetcher was the head of the community. I get introduced to Leroy. Leroy was a pilot as well. So I could get introduced as a pilot. I could be a pilot. So I could do that.
Right.
And then I could negotiate his checks. And the thought was, if I negotiate 3 checks, I'd negotiate one for like 10,000 and split it with him, negotiate one for 30,000, and then do one for like 3 million. And on the $3 million one, we'd split maybe $1 million each. But I would say, look, I can't bring that to you. You got to come out and get it. And that would be the lure of $1 million to lure him off the compound,
right.
5 acres, and then go. So I had pitched that, and the rule of engagement was no FBI employee can go into the compound. And at that point, it was 5 people, 5 acres, and that's what it was.
Okay. Yep.
So that's where it was. And so that progressed. And during the course of the undercover, I'm having discussions with him. And again, I can't go out. And he's adamant, I can't leave this place. I can't leave this place. And we're talking to him. And all of a sudden, 5 people, 1 building, 5 acres.
Yep.
In the night, they end up, we can hear them inside. And I'm not the agents that are listening to it can. And they hear, a lot of boxes, a lot of stuff, a lot of, hushed conversations. And then they load up and they get in their car and they drive like 100 miles to Brissett, Montana, which is in the middle of nowhere. And they hold up stakes and then basically set up the Montana Freeman up there. And that problem, like, not quadrupled, but it instead of a 1x, it was 100x, made it much more difficult. So from 5 guys, 5 acres, 1 building, it went from that to, initially we thought 900 acres, but it wasn't, because the 12,000 acres north of that they controlled. So it was almost 13,000 acres. It went from 5 people to like 20 to 25 men armed.
Wow.
It went from 1 building to like dozens of buildings and outhouses and all that. The problem just got,
holy cow, yeah,
more difficult and challenging. So they move up there, and the concern was, am I going to get reconnected with them? I did. We continued the undercover. We continued it for literally months. And, it just got to the point during the course of the case that he was like, look, why don't you come up? There's people that come up, they attend the class, and they don't do this and they don't do that. But, you're not coming up, and I'm not leaving the compound. So it really got to the point in the case that something needs to happen. And I came back to Tommy and said, look, I don't have a death wish. I mean, at that point, I think I had 7 kids.
Yeah.
And, similar to Director Free, but, it wasn't going anywhere because I was just having conversations with him over the phone, and I needed to do face-to-face. I'd done enough undercover with the disconnect case and met enough subjects there, that when you're face to face, this is not face to face, so we don't get that connection. But when you're face to face, you get that connection. You can read, nonverbal communication. You read their body language. You can work off that. And so he didn't meet me, and they all knew that they were wanted. They all knew that there was probably outstanding warrants for them, and none of them were really in the compound. And they talked about how they were going to do armed insurrection. They talked about how they were going to kill people, how they're going to kidnap people. So, and we were hearing it. And because we had devices within their, sensitive, collection techniques inside their buildings, we could hear what was going on and understood it. But they were gradually ticking up, their violence to the point that it was just a matter of time before, this powder keg blew up.
Right.
So I came back to Tommy and said, look, I'm not asking for this, and I'm not having a death wish, but I need to go in. So they end up calling the director of the FBI, Louis Freeh, and saying, look, we need to talk to you about changing the approach, because we can't, we've got to go in. And at that point, behavioral science was looking at it and said, look, these guys are very, very dangerous. And back then, even to today, if they would have known I was an FBI agent, in my view, knowing them and understanding them, they would have done exactly what behavioral science said, tortured me and killed me. Yeah. So, it gets to the point where, with the director, I said, just the way it is. So they reach out to the director, instead of communications back and forth, he flies out to Salt Lake City, and actually we have a sit down with him, to chat with him about it. So literally it's the director, his special assistant, the case agent, me, are the two GS-13s. And then there's the supervisor, there's the ASAC, there's the SAC, and we're all there to talk to Director Freeh about this is the issue. So as we start going into it, and it's hard to believe, I'm doing probably 90% of the talking. And he's asking questions, and he looks at me and he goes, so it sounds like you want to go in. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I've never got anything from anybody that indicated that you're asking to go in. And I'm waiting for the executive leadership to tell him what the story is, and no one said anything. And I finally said, sir, all due respect, it's gone in, but it's never gone up to you. So I briefed him for about 40 minutes about why I thought it was important to go in, stressed the fact that I don't have a death wish, noted the fact that he's got a lot of kids, I got a lot of kids, and that, I didn't want to leave them early,
right.
Reason. But that, it was getting dangerous, and this was the best approach. And so it was very cool. I was very impressed with Director Freeh. He was an agent, and he was one of the ones that, he was a director that was it was an agent and actually the director. And he looked and he turned to the SAC, Tom Kubik, and he said, Tom, how long would it take you to do an amendment, to have Agent Healy go in? And he goes, about 20 minutes. And he goes, write it up. I'll sign it. So literally 3 days later, I was driving into the compound for the first time to do the case. So,
what was it like on the compound, Tim?
It was, I've never done anything like that, and close to it. I've been in a Harrier that started coming apart, and felt okay with that, figuring out I'll be fine. But these guys were incredible. You fly into Billings, Montana, then you drive 4 hours into the compound. The last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you go through Jordan, Montana, which is 444 people. 444 people in this town. And then from Jordan, Montana, you drive 27 miles into the compound. 27 miles. The last 22 miles is on a dirt road. So out of Jordan, Montana, you got 5 miles of hardball road, and the last 22 miles are a dirt road.
Holy cow.
I live by Dulles Airport. I can drive from Dulles Airport to DC. It's less than 22 miles. So from Dulles Airport to DC, and this is when I'm talking to people that live in the DC area, you're driving that distance in a dirt road. When I got into the compound, I'll share with you the story if you'd like to hear it, but on one of the times I was in and stayed with them, first time I was in, we drive around the compound. Literally takes a couple hours to do that, to see everything. But it was so remote. I'll try to describe it like this. There was no existence of humans there. So when I say that, I mean, when you're out there in the bush, there's nothing that indicates a human had been there from the standpoint of tracks, from the standpoint of power lines, from the standpoint of anything. Their compound was 13,000 acres. It was 12,000 acres that they had, and then they had 900 acres was the ranch.
Wow.
So everything north of that, the border of that was the Missouri River or Peck Lake. Peck Lake was formed by a reservoir. Peck Lake, it was interesting because when I saw Peck Lake, it came to mind in Stephen Ambrose's book, Undaunted Courage, which is the historical, which captures the Lewis and Clark expedition. He talks about Peck Lake in that book. And what he says is from Peck Lake, from where Peck Lake is west for the next 180 miles or 150 miles, whatever he said, is the only place in the United States that is the way it was back when Lewis and Clark went through it, 200 and something years ago. Yeah. That's how remote it was. So, I literally drove in and I start getting indoctrinated by Leroy, which is a couple-hour process. And then he says, "Would you like to go for a ride?" I said, "Sure." And so we get in the car and we start driving around. And that's when I see Peck Lake and all of that. We're literally driving for like an hour and a half, just driving around, seeing different things. And I mean, the place is so vast. It's huge. I mean, what they commanded, that area, was like bigger than Rhode Island. I mean, it was bigger than Rhode Island.
Oh, that's crazy to think.
It wasn't big. It was just crazy big.
Yeah.
And it was, we're driving and I'm in the car. Leroy's driving. I'm on the right side. I don't have a gun. Leroy's got a gun. Edwin Clark, he brings Edwin Clark with us, who seemed like to be a decent guy. And he turned out to be a decent guy, except for the comment he made. And I testified to this, probably 2 or 3 times. And he says, we're in the car and we're rounding this turn. And what was crazy is these guys, I mean, they're eagle eyes, right? I mean, they're pointing out, game. And they're saying, "Oh, there's a deer there. There's a moose here." And I'm going, "Oh, I see it." And they go, "No, Mike, it's over here." And, I'm a jet pilot. I'm supposed to see really good. And I'm thinking to myself, the rules of engagement are, we're not going to come in after you. You're going to have to evade and go. And I'm thinking, yeah, evade. I'm going to evade. These guys know this territory. I don't know anything. I'm going to have to swim across Peck Lake.
For real, yeah.
Or the Missouri River to get north of them that they can't touch me, right? And that's after going miles, in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. So we literally get out and they point about Peck Lake. And I've got a suit and tie on just to look ridiculously, foolishly out of dress so that they feel comfortable with me. And I get up and I'm standing literally on a cliff and I'm looking at Peck Lake, thinking about Stephen Ambrose's book and the fact that we're in the middle of nowhere. And, just to see how I can control them for a while. And it's uncomfortable to get back in the car, start driving. And we turn this corner and I'll never forget it. Edwin says to me, "This would be a great place to kill an FBI agent and hide his body." And I'm literally thinking very similar, yeah. And I turned to him, I said, "Edwin, you could kill 100 FBI agents here, hide the body, and no one would ever know." And he starts laughing, and that's kind of Freeman humor. So it was,
gosh,
it was a crazy, crazy experience. And when they're teaching you and indoctrinating you, it's beyond crazy. I mean, it's you. I give you the example. Dale Jacoby, one of the subjects, tall guy, like 6'4", is describing to me with this other new Montana Freeman. And the new Montana Freeman was visiting them, and he didn't live with the team. And we're just sitting there listening. I'm sitting there listening to him with him. And Jacobs goes, "Do you know that the U.S. government can control the weather?" And the guy next to me, who's learning this as well, gives him these looks, and he's obviously gives him these nonverbal looks like you're full of garbage. Like, what do you mean? I mean,
Yeah.
Jacoby doesn't even react to it. He's not reading body language, and I'm just kind of reading the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then he describes how they got this system that, this refractor that can control the weather and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking logically, if they could control the weather, they're after you. Why wouldn't they just park a cloud over you and just start snowing for like 20 days, and just make it like that, right?
Yeah.
Or at dinner, you're sitting there and they're making dinner and you're having dinner, and some guy's talking about how he had shot a moose out of season, and the game warden had basically arrested him. And Leroy was washing the dishes, and I'll never forget this. He's washing the dishes, and he stops and he turns and he looks to the guy and he says, "You had a gun. Why didn't you just kill the game warden?"
Holy mackerel.
And he goes, "I don't know what I was thinking." And so my point is that they talk about crazy stuff. They talk about killing people. They talk about kidnapping people. Like I'm talking about, I'm going out, I took my wife out to a restaurant yesterday.
Right.
They had steak, right? So that's kind of how they are. And they describing them as crazy, weird it's like another planet. This is probably not a good example for this podcast, but my undercover name was Mike Manson. That was years ago, right? From 89 to 93, I walked into 65 fraudulent phone rooms. I talked to hundreds of people, fraudulent telemarketers. Back then, Charlie Manson was a big deal, right? Charlie Manson, with Tatum and the murders and stuff like that. And Charlie Manson was in prison for eons. And so when I'm doing undercover with the fraudulent telemarketers, I'm introducing myself as, "Hey, Mike Manson, call me Charlie." And the telemarketers will look at you and go, "Charlie, I get it. That's Charlie."
Right. Yep.
Every time you said that, they would laugh and joke.
Yeah, for sure.
Hundreds of jokes like that. When I introduced myself to Leroy and the every Montana guy, I said, "Hey, Mike Manson, call me Charlie." And they look at me like, "I thought your name was Mike. Why would they call you Charlie?" And I go, "Forget it." And the point is, it's like they're on a different plane, a different reality, if you will.
That's incredible.
So you're looking at these guys, and behavioral science are saying, and believe me, Melissa, I believe this till today, and I testify to it. If they knew who I was, they would have tortured me and killed me in a heartbeat, without a doubt. So they were absolutely their whole life, their whole discussion point was centered around their religion. And when I say their religion, I'm talking about the Freeman religion, their interpretations, and how we can be our own country, and we have our own judge and jury, and I'm a Supreme Court justice. And so you can basically, you put out a warrant for a guy, they bring him in, they do a mock trial, they sentence him to death, and they kill him, and that was okay with them. And I honestly believe there was a point in time that got really dicey, and it was a question of, I thought that the jig was up for me, in a couple times there. So it was really an interesting assignment.
How did you? And I know obviously by this point you've had a long history, of SWAT work, undercover work, the work you did in the Marine Corps, but how did you keep your wits about you, those moments like that when you were in the car with Leroy, and they're making the joke about, dumping an FBI agent's body and stuff? How did you keep your wits in those moments?
It was challenging, but you really, when you're doing the undercover stuff, I got to tell you that the FBI training for undercover, it's 2 weeks long. It is extremely intense. And I went through it, and really, you get through that, you can handle a lot of different things. And it was that. And it was just when you're in a Harrier, Harrier's coming apart, you've got procedures you're doing, right? The Harrier's coming down, and you've had friends be killed, and I never thought I was going to die. I just thought I'll just work through it. And on the Freeman case, I just thought I'd work through it. There was a time we had a number of different options to do the arrest, and we eventually settled on Hill 32. And when there was a break between Hill 32 and then a couple other different approaches, and then we went back to Hill 32. But the time had lapsed significantly since I had been there to see if I could actually carry out Hill 32. And the significance of Hill 32, the only reason we call it Hill 32 is that they had terrain feature that was a prominent kind of hill at 3,200 feet. And it was situated between two of the Freeman houses. and it was a perfect location to do an arrest and to take him down. And you could see most of the compound and most of the the bad guys if you needed to. So I actually had to go back in to test the theory to see if I could get Leroy in a car by just him and I, because prior to that, I'd gone into the compound and stayed there for a number of days, over a period of months. And we'd always travel in threes, and it was always uncomfortable like that. And so the idea is that we eventually went to trying to lure Leroy out of the compound, to lure him to a place in the compound and arrest him, and then basically get him out.
Okay.
So as we were prepping for that, I had to go back in to make sure that, I could get Leroy to a spot, specifically Hill 32, where a bunch of HRT people would be there. So I go there under a pretense of this is what I need to do. And Leroy and I get in the car and say, let's drive. And he's driving. I'm not. And we get to Hill 32. We're driving around. We go out of Hill 32. And we've been driving mostly north, never south. South was, the border of the Freeman compound. And, it was literally a line. Everything north was, the Missouri River. Okay. Everything south, it was a line. And they tended to stay, they had a buffer of a couple miles, so that they would stay away from it.
Yep.
And, we're planning to do this arrest in the next week or so. And in the next week, there's going to be 800 agents that are going to be deployed to take these guys down, to arrest Leroy, and to, close down the compound and start a siege, which was going to be a potential Waco, Ruby Ridge. So there was some concern there. And Leroy and I get in the car and we start driving, and I know, I'm testing him out, and he brings an AR-15 with him and a pistol, and we're driving. And so we get to the Hill 32 and we're going and go through it. And all of a sudden he starts driving. He makes a left turn instead of a right turn, and we're heading kind of out of the compound. And I'm thinking, holy Toledo.
Yeah. We
drive a good 5 miles and get to literally I could see the end of the compound. Now, we are still, 27 miles away from Jordan, Montana, which is 444 people.
Yep.
We're another hour and a half from Gwinnett, which is 1,500 people. Still no FBI, no good people. I'm in the car alone with him. I've got no way to secure him. It's my vehicle that I brought, but I've got no way to secure him. I've got no handcuffs. I've got nothing. He's about as big as I am. Okay. And he pulls out and stops at the compound. He's looking over there, and he looks at me and he hands me this AR-15 and says, look, if somebody comes, kill him. And I'm honestly thinking, I'm going to thump this guy and take him out.
Yeah.
And I could take him out right now, and and then it would be over with. And then we'd say, come on out, and Tim's gone with Leroy, right, and that's it. But it's going to be a fight. It's going to last more than a few minutes. And I'm not sure I'm going to win. I think I can. I've got no way to restrain him. But then I've got to deal with him for like 3 or 4 hours, trying to get him to point A to point B, which is going to be
right.
Easy. And so the moment passes in my mind about, we're not going to do that. So he turns around, and literally within 15 seconds of us turning around, Dan Peterson, the number 2 guy, and a truckload of Montana Freemen come over the hill. And I'm thinking to myself, had I done something, they would have come across when I was fighting with Leroy, and then that would have been it.
Yep.
So I was glad, but I was thinking about taking him down. I didn't say anything. I just was thinking about it. So anyway, we go back to the schoolhouse, which was where they did all the training, and he gets on the radio and his whole demeanor changes. And I'm like, just kind of not taken aback, but wondering what the heck is going on and what's happening with it. And he says, he gets on the radio that we give him. And so when he gets on the radio, we're in the schoolhouse, and the FBI can hear him, can hear me. And he says, Mike's at the schoolhouse. All male members of the male Freeman compound report to schoolhouse. They start coming in, and the yucking it up that we were doing for the last months stopped. And now it became like this formal, and they all line up. They all are armed. I'm unarmed. Leroy's there. Leroy's not talking like a friend anymore. He's talking more like a Supreme Court justice. And it's getting really, really strange and really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm thinking there's no way this guy could have read my mind that I was going to take him down. And I'm thinking, what could I have done that could have caused, this mistake, or how could it have been, and blah, blah, blah. And listen, I'm to the point, I'm like, dang. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get killed here. I'm going to get tortured and killed. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck did you do? What mistake did you make? I'm thinking that.
Right. And
then I'm thinking how my wife, is going to be furious at me that if I get killed, she'll never talk to me again. And when we're up in heaven together, I'll hear it for the rest of eternity. And then the third thing is I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to go light. I mean, I'm going to go soft.
Yeah. And
I'm thinking to myself, do they know if I'm left-handed or not? These guys are all right-handed, and they're all carrying guns, like 6-shooters. And Dan Peterson is kind of close to me, and I'm thinking, okay, I could get his gun and shoot Leroy, and then shoot Dan, because I'm thinking, okay, number 1, number 2,
right,
and then try to negotiate or try to shoot the rest of them, right? So they're all coming in, and they're all being very, very formal, and I'm thinking, this is it. I mean, this is going to be like a firing squad. And as they're doing that, Leroy starts approaching me, and I'm blading myself to take a hit. I'm expecting him to slap me in the face and make some accusation of me.
Yep.
And then I'm going to grab Dan's gun, and Dan's not going to have a gun, but Leroy is. I'm going to pop one right in the head, take his gun, shoot Dan as quickly as I can, so number 1 and 2 are gone, and then see if I can negotiate my way out or whatever. Yep. Honestly, this is going in my head. And as Leroy comes up, and I'm kind of blading myself like this, he raises his left hand, not his right, and starts reading this oath of office, and he's swearing me in to be a Montana Freeman. And I raise my right hand. He goes, Mike, it's left hand. So I'm raising my left hand, and then I'm sworn in. I'm sworn in as a Montana Freeman. So I drive out of the compound. And Tommy Kennedy says, calls me up when I get to Billings, and he goes, okay, did you get a badge? I want to see your badge. And I said, I did. So
oh my gosh.
So anyway, long and the short of it
is
the next week we were practicing to take it down. And because I was a Montana Freeman with badge, the SAC says, is there any way you can get Dan Peterson too? And I said, you got to be kidding me, sir. And so we come up with a way to try to get them both. So the Montana Freeman case.
Tim, talk to us about how the Montana Freeman case would end.
So number of times I went in, and then finally, I went in to do the arrest, and we had trained, so we'd get Leroy Schweitzer and Dan Peterson. So I go in the night before with the idea to keep them up all late at night, and I did. Get up the next morning, and basically have to come up with a reason that Dan's got to come with us, and I did. He was the treasurer, and I said, look, we need to talk about treasurer issues. The catch is that I had to get Leroy in the car, Dan in the car, and I had to drive them to a spot, but I actually had to park the car in a certain location. I had to walk them and get them into a very specific part. I was dealing with the HRT guys. They weren't undercover trained, but they were the best HRT guys. They were ninjas. I mean, they were amazing. So we spent a lot of time doing rehearsals and things like that, and I really needed to get them in the right spot. So long and the short of it is that we get up the next morning, they get delayed. By the time they show up, the Freemen are starting to go, so it gets really difficult to kind of manage all the people. I'm trying to get Leroy going. I'd already set the stage with Dan to say, I want you to come with, and he's cool with that. So, and I said to Leroy, I got to drive. And Leroy says, no problem. So I get in the car, start driving. I've got to pick either turn right or turn left. Each one has challenges. If I turn left from the schoolhouse to get to where the HRT guys are, I'm going to pass all the Montana houses, and that's going to stir up things. If I go right, it's going to be less. But then when we make the final turn, they're going to see them all, and there's going to be questions to ask. And so I went right. And as we went through it all, I knew the questions, anticipated them, got to the spot, talked to them about it, got out of the car, talked to Leroy, said, let's go. We get out of the car. We walk down a hill, maybe 10 yards to get to where the HRT guys are. And Dan Peterson's supposed to be directly behind me. Leroy's right here, and we're whispering back and forth. And I introduced Leroy Schweitzer to Chuck Pierce, who's the head, HRT guy who I've been working with. And he says, Supreme Court Justice Schweitzer takes Leroy over to the spot. And basically, Leroy is in the perfect spot. He's perfect location. when I turn to the other two team members, I'm expecting Dan Peterson to be like a foot or two away from me, and these guys are going to be close, and they're walking funny, like something's going on, and something's up, and I could tell by the way their gait was, it's crazy, there's not right. And I'm turning to look at Dan, and he's not there, and I realize Dan's on the top of the hill. He obviously feels uncomfortable with these people. Now, what I didn't know until later was Dan Peterson's wife, Cheryl, was telling him in front of one of the recorders that we had, one of the devices that the agents could hear, and I didn't hear this. She's telling him, don't go there because, bring more people. And he's telling her, shut up. Now, the Freeman doctrine is white males are king and females are second-class citizens. And if he would have listened to this alleged second-class citizen, she would have beat us, right? And I grew up with 6 girls, so I never considered a woman a second-class citizen.
For sure.
So I didn't know that it occurred, but so the FBI knows that's going on. So the people are like, there's trepidation about, hey, this may not go. So I'm looking at him, and now that I know the other end of the story, he's obviously thinking, why didn't I listen to her? So, as we drive up, Leroy, he's got an AR-15 and a gun, and he's got a gun inside that I didn't know about. And then Peterson's got an outside gun and an inside gun. And as we get out of the car, Leroy says, here, take the AR-15. So I leave it in the car because one gun out of the fight is cool. So it's left in the car. So when we go down there to get Leroy in position, Leroy walks off, and I don't have the gun, which I didn't want to have anyway. When I see Dan Peterson stuck at the car, and the whole project's going to go down because if he doesn't come down, they're not going to do the arrest. It's a no-go. And if it doesn't go this time, the chances of second, third, and fourth are minimal. And clearly he's concerned about it, so there's not going to be a time where there's not a dozen Freemen there. And then I realized I forgot the gun. And I knew I forgot the gun, but I made it overtly I forgot the gun. I jogged up, grabbed the gun, got behind Dan, and kind of worked it down the hill. I'm whispering to him, I need you to do this, Dan. So anyway, long and short of it is, he gets in position. The HRT guy that's basically the command, they can see everything, starts walking up. He's going to either shake Dan's hand with a glove on, meaning we're not doing it, or he's going to assess the situation and say, we're ready to go, take off the glove. The glove starts coming off, so I know it's going down. He touches Dan, and Melissa, it's as if Dan's bones dissolved. He hit the ground so quickly but softly. Leroy was down, they cuffed him, and then basically they got their gear up, and we drove out of there. The only thing that Leroy said to me when he was on the ground was the first and last thing he said, not first and last, but the last thing he said to me. He looked at me and he said, you son of a bitch.
Oh, my gosh.
And so we got him out of there, successful. No one got hurt. The standoff, I think, lasted 81 days, the longest that the FBI ever had a standoff. No one got killed, no one got hurt. And to be honest with you, I did it for a couple reasons. I did it because it was right. I did it because we wanted to get these guys out. But I was as concerned about their well-being as I was the agents, because these guys weren't going to be taken alive.
Right.
So it meant they had to be killed because they would have pulled their guns to shoot the agents. And so, it was an intense case. There was a time there that, when I went in for the last time, I figured I gave myself a 20%, 80% success rate. I thought 80% I can make it out and be successful. 20% I'm not going to make it, meaning I'm going to die. And so I had the numbers, but I never wanted to walk in a situation where 20% I think I would die. So that ended that. And then I went back and, I jumped on, I got done. They started the standoff. I went home a couple days later, got in a plane, flew my wife to Orlando. My parents came out to watch our kids. Between flights, I'm in Denver airport, and it's like day 6 of Freeman standoff. And we're walking by all the newspapers, and my wife looks at me and she says, you're never doing this undercover crap again. And that's it. I turned to her and say, I wanted to be an FBI agent in 1972. I met you in 1975. End of story. She said, we're done. I said, rut-row, we're not done. So the deal I cut at the airport was, to save, not my marriage, but to save, her anguish.
Right.
Was I'll try to be a supervisor. And if it doesn't work, I'm not going to do it. If it does work, great. And I honestly didn't think it was going to work. But I went on to do, to other missions. I went on to do and create the Internet Fraud Complaint Center. That was my idea in order for the FBI to address internet crime. And that led to a whole bunch of different things when 9/11 hit. So and then it led me to a number of different opportunities that I wouldn't have had. And it was a great career that I loved.
That's absolutely tremendous, Tim. And I have no words for it. Your service to our country, other than a sincere thank you for the service. Tim, and you touched on it a couple times. You've raised a remarkable family of children. Would you talk to us a little bit about your wife and children?
We have 7 kids, and we have 6 boys and 1 girl. And I married my high school sweetheart. My first date, we went to a party, and at the end of the party, I took her home, and I said, "I love you. I'm going to marry you. We're going to have a lot of kids." She was a sophomore in high school. She was 15 years old. I just turned 18. 5 years later, we got married.
Incredible.
And we have amazing children. So we have our oldest is a paramedic in LA Fire Department. Tim was a Marine helicopter pilot, combat veteran, Afghanistan twice, Iraq once. He's now a special agent in the FBI. -3 is a cybersecurity guy. All of them are married except the youngest with kids. -4 is a orthopedic surgeon in the Navy with 4 kids. -5 is a Marine Corps Naval Academy graduate, Afghanistan veteran with 4 kids. My daughter's a nurse, and my youngest is a Army Ranger that has been. He was the last one to serve in Afghanistan before we were evacuated out. So wonderful, wonderful, amazing people, all because of their mother. Nothing to do with their dad.
Oh God, okay, I don't know about that, but oh my gosh, Tim, absolutely incredible, and we thank them all for their incredible service to our great country too. As we touched on in the very beginning of the show, Tim, you work for ID Technologies now. ID has been such an incredible, sponsor, supporter of all things Catch a Lift, including the Coach's Corner podcast, which we couldn't be more grateful for. And talking specifically kind of about ID's involvement with the podcast, Tim, one of our main goals with this podcast is to be able to, tell the stories of service, transition, but ultimately triumph that our veterans go through. And, you being a father of combat veterans yourself, how do you believe CAL's mission is needed today for so many servicemen and women of our country?
Well, I got to share with you, and I'll be quick. I didn't appreciate what my wife went through, and I'll get to your answer, until I lived it. When my oldest, that was a combat veteran, went to Afghanistan, he's talking to me on the phone, and we're chatting, and then he says, "Dad, I got to go. I got to hop." And I go, "You got to hop?" And he goes, "I'll see you later." And he goes, and I turn to my wife and I say, "He's got to hop." And she goes, "I know." And I flew. I know what a sortie is. And I said, "He's going into combat." I said, "Our son's going into combat right now." And she said, "Welcome to my world." That was her world. That I didn't appreciate that like I did. I will share with you, we're a service family.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the Freeman experience was intense. And there's shots that you take with that. There's marks that you carry with you, because of that risk, as intensely as it is. And that doesn't compare to somebody that's in combat for months and months and months. And our 3 children that have served, came back affected. Yeah. The FBI agent is coming out of it. The other kids, he went twice, and he was in Iraq. So your cause and what you guys do is really personal to me, because I understand that we lived it. I mean, when he came back, the kids noticed there's a change. He was really hot, and he really had these flares of anger and stuff like that.
Right.
That just that was really difficult. So the men and women that serve, doing God's work, whether you agree with what they did or what they didn't do, or agree with the political decision, these people put their lives on the line, to keep us safe. That's what they do. And that's what they did. And that's what they continue to do. And they carry scars with that. What you guys do, and the reason, when I was first introduced to this, it was write a little note saying, hey, these guys are good. And then when I found out what you guys did, I said, I don't want to write a little note. I'd rather be part of it and be playing with it and be part of what they do and how they do it to support it. Because I know personally, with my own kids that haven't benefited from it, but how they could, and how these guys and male and guys is a unisex term.
Right. Yep.
Is how their lives are better for it. And it allows them, like I've had with my sons, to have conversations, with like people that had like experiences that say, how did you feel about that? Well, it kind of bothered me a little bit, and here's what it was, and here's how I felt about it. And so anything for the troops, and especially with what you guys are doing, is especially with COVID and the ability. I was a college athlete, with the ability to be able to work out, and do that and stay in shape, is a gift that you can give people that you don't. It's again doing God's work. So I really am proud to be supporting it, and anything I can do to, and I'm glad that our company is a sponsor for it. Anything we can do to support that, I'm game. So that's why I'm here talking about a whole bunch of different stuff.
Well, it was so much fun talking to you today, Tim. I can't even describe it. Thank you so very much for your time. Thank you so much for your service to our great country that's just spanned decades and decades. We couldn't be more grateful for men like you. That is it for this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. We will return next Wednesday at 1 Eastern Time with another episode. Thank you again, Tim, for sharing your story and your light with us all. Absolutely fantastic. Huge thank you to ID Technologies for your support of all things Catch a Lift, but especially for your support of the Coach's Corner podcast. We could not be more grateful. Thank you to Lynn Coughlin, Henry Pomper, and Kaylee Nasiri for all the work that you do to make this podcast possible week after week. And we thank the entire Catch a Lift team. Don't forget to join us every Wednesday live at 1 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for your chance to win Cal swag and to chat with your brothers and sisters. Until next week, keep it real and stay Cal strong.